The morning sun cast long shadows across the Navy SEAL training compound as Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her medical bag one final time. She had been assigned to this elite unit only 3 weeks ago, replacing their previous medic who had been injured during a training exercise. The SEALs had been polite but distant, treating her with the professional courtesy they showed all support staff, nothing more. Sarah understood their hesitation. She was an outsider, a civilian contractor who had never worn the uniform or earned the respect that came with military service. At least that's what they believed. She had chosen not to correct their assumptions, finding it easier to blend into the background and focus on her medical duties. The team leader, Commander Jake Morrison, gathered his men around the briefing table. 8 elite warriors, each one a legend in his own right, prepared for another grueling day of training exercises. Sarah took her usual position at the back of the room, medical supplies ready, observing the dynamics of this tight-knit brotherhood. "Today we're running a full combat simulation," Morrison announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led countless real missions. Urban warfare scenario, live ammunition exercises, and high-stress medical situations. "Chen, you'll be monitoring from the observation post and responding to any real injuries." The SEALs nodded, their faces serious. These weren't ordinary soldiers playing war games. These were the best of the best. Men who had seen real combat in the world's most dangerous places. Their training reflected that reality, pushing them to their absolute limits both physically and mentally. As they moved to the training area, Sarah noticed the subtle ways the team communicated. Hand signals, brief glances, and entire language developed through years of working together in life-or-death situations. She recognized the signs of a truly elite unit, something she had witnessed before in very different circumstances. The exercise began with the crack of gunfire echoing across the compound. Sarah watched through high-powered binoculars as the team moved through the mock urban environment. With fluid precision, each man knew his role perfectly, covering his teammates while advancing toward their objective. It was like watching a deadly dance, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Morrison led from the front, as always. His reputation preceded him. 3 tours in Afghanistan, countless successful missions, and the unwavering loyalty of every man who had served under him. He was the kind of leader who earned respect through action, not words, and his team would follow him anywhere. The first hour passed without incident. The SEALs moved through their scenarios with practiced ease, their communication crisp and efficient. Sarah found herself impressed despite her professional detachment. These men were good, very good, and she could see why they were considered among the world's elite special forces. Then everything changed in an instant. A live ammunition exercise was underway when something went wrong with one of the range safety systems. A ricochet caught Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez in the thigh, the bullet tearing through muscle and nicking his femoral artery. Blood began pouring from the wound as Rodriguez collapsed behind cover, his teammates immediately moving to shield him from further fire. "Medic!" Morrison's voice cut through the gunfire as the exercise was immediately halted. "Chen, we need you here now." Sarah was already moving before the call came through her radio. She had seen the incident through her binoculars and was sprinting toward the training area with her medical bag. The distance that had taken the SEALs 20 minutes to cover tactically, she crossed in under 3 minutes at a dead run. She arrived to find Rodriguez conscious but losing blood fast. The other SEALs had formed a protective circle around their wounded teammate, their weapons still at the ready despite the training exercise being over. In their world, you never knew when training might become real, and they weren't taking any chances with their medic or their wounded brother. "Move back. Give me room to work," Sarah ordered, dropping to her knees beside Rodriguez. Her voice carried a new authority that hadn't been there during her previous 3 weeks with the unit. This wasn't the quiet civilian contractor anymore. This was someone taking charge of a life-or-death situation. Rodriguez was pale, his pulse rapid and weak. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency, cutting away his tactical pants to expose the wound. The sight was worse than she had hoped. The bullet had indeed nicked the femoral artery, and Rodriguez was bleeding internally as well as externally. "I need a tourniquet." "Dave, kit, and get me a helicopter," she called out. Her voice calmed despite the severity of the situation. "He's got arterial bleeding and possible internal injuries. We need to get him to surgery within the hour." The SEALs moved to follow her orders, but Sarah could see the doubt in their eyes. They respected her medical training, but this was beyond anything they had expected from their support medic. This was combat medicine at its highest level, and they weren't sure she was up to the challenge. Sarah didn't have time to worry about their doubts. Rodriguez was dying, and she was the only thing standing between him and a coffin. She applied pressure to the wound while simultaneously establishing an IV line. Her movements quick and sure. Years of training and experience guided her hands as she worked to stabilize her patient. "Stay with me, Rodriguez," she said, checking his pulse again. "You're going to be fine. I've seen worse than this, and those guys made it home to their families. You're going to do the same." As she worked, the SEALs watched in growing amazement. This wasn't the careful, methodical work of a civilian medic. This was battlefield medicine, performed with the kind of skill and confidence that only came from experience under fire. Sarah moved like someone who had done this before many times, in places where a single mistake meant death. The helicopter arrived within 20 minutes, its rotors whipping dust across the training ground. Sarah had stabilized Rodriguez enough for transport, but she knew the real fight was just beginning. As they loaded him onto the aircraft, she climbed in beside him, never breaking contact with her patient. "I'm staying with him," she told Morrison when he moved to follow. "You're needed here. I'll take care of your man." As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Rodriguez toward the nearest trauma center, the remaining SEALs stood in stunned silence. They had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that didn't fit with their understanding of their quiet medic. The woman who had just saved their teammate's life wasn't who they thought she was, and they were beginning to realize they didn't know Dr. Sarah Chen at all. The trauma center's operating room buzzed with controlled chaos as Rodriguez was wheeled in. Sarah had maintained pressure on his wound throughout the helicopter flight, monitoring his vital signs and keeping him conscious with steady conversation. By the time they reached the hospital, she had managed to stabilize his condition enough to give the surgical team a fighting chance. Dr. Michael Barnes, the chief trauma surgeon, met them at the landing pad. Sarah quickly briefed him on Rodriguez's condition, using medical terminology that surprised the veteran surgeon. Her assessment was thorough and accurate, delivered with the kind of precision that spoke of extensive field experience. Femoral artery nick, possible internal bleeding, blood pressure dropping but stable for now, Sarah reported as they rushed toward the operating room. "I've got 2 IVs running," gave him morphine for pain management, and applied a pressure bandage to the primary wound site. Dr. Barnes nodded, impressed by the quality of field care Rodriguez had received. In his 20 years as a trauma surgeon, he had seen too many casualties arrive in much worse condition despite having received immediate medical attention. Whoever this medic was, she knew her business. "Good work," he told Sarah as they prepared to transfer Rodriguez to the surgical team. "Your field treatment probably saved his life. We'll take it from here." Sarah watched as Rodriguez disappeared behind the operating room doors, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion that came after an adrenaline-fueled medical emergency. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the familiar weight of responsibility that came with holding someone's life in your hands. Meanwhile, back at the SEAL compound, Commander Morrison was fielding questions from his superiors about the incident. The training accident would require a full investigation, but his immediate concern was for his wounded teammate and the medic who had risked her own safety to save him. "Sir, I need to know more about Dr. Chen," Morrison told Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base medical officer, during their debriefing. "What she did out there today wasn't standard civilian medic training. She moved like someone who's done combat medicine before." Colonel Hayes pulled Sarah's personnel file, scanning through the details that had seemed routine when she was first assigned to the SEAL team. "According to this, she's a civilian contractor with emergency medicine experience. Previous employment with various medical organizations, excellent references, clean background check." Morrison frowned. "Ma'am, with respect, what I saw today goes beyond emergency room experience. She performed battlefield triage under pressure, made command decisions about medical evacuation, and handled herself like someone with military training. I think there's more to her story than what's in that file." The colonel made a note to look deeper into Sarah's background. Morrison was one of her most experienced commanders, and his instincts about people were rarely wrong. If he sensed something unusual about their medic, it was worth investigating. At the hospital, Sarah sat in the waiting room, still wearing her blood-stained tactical gear. She had called the base to report Rodriguez's status and was now waiting for news from the surgery. The familiar antiseptic smell of the hospital brought back memories she had spent years trying to suppress. A young nurse approached her. "Excuse me, are you the medic who came in with the seal?" Sarah nodded. "How is he?" "The surgery went well," the nurse replied with a smile. "Dr. Barnes said you did excellent work in the field. He wants to speak with you when you have a moment." Sarah found Dr. Barnes in his office reviewing Rodriguez's surgical reports. He looked up when she entered, gesturing for her to sit down. "Your patient is going to make a full recovery," he began. "The surgery was successful, and barring any complications, he should be back to duty in 6 to 8 weeks. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you, doctor. I was worried about the internal bleeding." Dr. Barnes studied her carefully. "In 30 years of medicine, I've worked with medics from every branch of the military. What you did today was exceptional field medicine. Where did you learn to work under that kind of pressure?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah had been dreading this moment since she first applied for the position with the SEALs. She had hoped her past would remain buried, that she could simply do her job and avoid the questions that inevitably came when people saw her true capabilities. "I've had some experience with trauma medicine," she said, carefully. Dr. Barnes wasn't satisfied with the vague answer. "I've seen trauma nurses with 20 years of experience freeze up in situations like today. You didn't just handle the pressure, you thrived under it. That kind of composure comes from extensive experience with life or death situations." Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from Morrison. "Rodriguez status? Need you back at base for debrief." She showed the message to Dr. Barnes. "I should get back to my unit." "Of course," he said, standing to shake her hand. "But I hope we get a chance to talk more in the future. People with your skills are rare, and I'd be interested in hearing more about your background." Sarah returned to the base as the sun was setting, the compound unusually quiet after the day's dramatic events. She found Morrison in his office reviewing incident reports with Sergeant Major Tom Williams, the team's senior enlisted man. "Chen, good to have you back," Morrison said, looking up from his paperwork. "How's Rodriguez?" "Surgery was successful," Sarah reported. "Full recovery expected in 6 to 8 weeks. He'll need physical therapy, but he should be cleared for full duty." Williams nodded approvingly. "Good work today, Doc. You saved one of ours." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with new interest. "That's what I want to talk about. What you did today was impressive, but it raised some questions. Your personnel file says you're a civilian emergency medicine specialist, but what I witnessed was military-grade combat medicine." Sarah had prepared for this conversation during the drive back from the hospital, but she still felt her stomach tighten. "I've had extensive training in trauma medicine." "Where?" Morrison pressed. "Because what I saw today wasn't something you learn in a civilian hospital. You moved like someone who's been under fire before, someone who's done battlefield medicine in actual combat situations." The room fell silent as Sarah weighed her options. She had spent 3 years building a new life, putting her past behind her and trying to find peace in civilian medicine. But watching Rodriguez bleeding out on the training ground had awakened something in her that she thought she had buried forever. "I can't discuss my previous assignments," she said. Finally, Morrison and Williams exchanged glances. That answer told them more than Sarah probably realized. Civilian contractors didn't have assignments they couldn't discuss. That language belonged to military personnel, specifically those involved in classified operations. "Chen," Morrison said gently, "if you've served before, there's no shame in that. This team respects military experience, but I need to know who I'm working with, especially after what happened today." Sarah looked at these two warriors, men who had dedicated their lives to protecting others, and felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her. They deserved to know the truth, especially after she had proven herself under fire. But revealing her past would change everything, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that conversation. Sarah stared at the two men across from her, their faces showing the kind of patience that came from years of dealing with classified information and sensitive situations. She could see they weren't going to let this drop, and part of her was relieved. Carrying the weight of her past alone had been exhausting. "If I tell you," she said slowly, "it stays in this room. What I'm about to share could put people at risk if it gets out." Morrison nodded. "You have my word. Whatever you've done, wherever you've served, it stays between us." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling like she was about to jump off a cliff. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I spent 8 years as a Navy flight surgeon and combat medic. My last assignment was with DevGru. The silence that followed was deafening. Williams leaned forward in his chair, his eyes widening. DevGru, SEAL Team 6, was the most elite special operations unit in the American military. Getting assigned there as medical personnel meant she had been the best of the best. Morrison's expression had shifted from curiosity to something approaching awe. DevGru, how many deployments? 12, Sarah replied quietly. Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and 3 I can't discuss. I was the primary medical officer for Gold Squadron for 4 years. Williams whistled low. Gold Squadron was legendary even among the SEALs, responsible for some of the most daring and sensitive operations in recent military history. Having their medical officer sitting in this room was like discovering they had been working alongside a ghost. "Why didn't you tell us?" Morrison asked. "Your credentials would have earned you instant respect from the entire team." Sarah's expression grew distant, her mind drifting back to memories she had tried to bury. "Because my last mission ended badly. Really badly, and I needed to get away from all of this." She gestured around the office, indicating not just the room but the entire military world they inhabited. "I thought I could leave it behind, start fresh as a civilian contractor. I just wanted to help people without all the complications." Morrison sensed there was much more to the story, but he didn't press. He had seen enough combat veterans struggling with their past to recognize the signs. Whatever had happened on Sarah's last mission, it had been traumatic enough to make her walk away from an elite military career. "What changed your mind?" Williams asked. "About staying quiet, I mean." Sarah managed a small smile. "Watching Rodriguez bleeding out today reminded me why I became a medic in the first place. It wasn't about the glory or the elite assignments. It was about being there when someone needed me most." Over the next hour, Sarah shared some of her experiences with DevGru, carefully avoiding classified details but giving Morrison and Williams enough information to understand her background. She had been part of operations that had made headlines around the world, providing medical support in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. "The last mission," Morrison said carefully, "the one that made you leave. Can you talk about it?" Sarah's hands clenched involuntarily. "A hostage rescue in Syria. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. We lost 3 good men and—" She paused, struggling with the memory. "I couldn't save them. I had all the training, all the experience, and I couldn't save them." Williams, who had lost teammates in combat himself, understood immediately. Survivor's guilt. "It's not your fault, Doc. Sometimes the mission goes sideways and there's nothing anyone can do." "I know that intellectually," Sarah replied, "but knowing something and feeling it are 2 different things. I needed time away from combat medicine to remember why I loved being a medic in the first place." Morrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training compound where his men continued their endless preparation for missions that might never come. "So what happens now? Do you go back to pretending you're just a civilian contractor?" Sarah considered the question. Today had shown her that she couldn't completely escape who she was. When Rodriguez needed help, her DevGru training had taken over automatically. She had moved with the precision and confidence that came from years of operating with the military's elite units. "I don't know," she admitted. "Today felt different. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was where I belonged." Williams leaned back in his chair. "The team's going to have questions after what they saw today. Word's already spreading about how you handled Rodriguez's injury. These guys aren't stupid. They know exceptional medical work when they see it." Morrison turned back to face Sarah. "We could keep your background quiet if that's what you want, but I think you'd find this team more accepting than you might expect. These men respect competence and courage, and you've demonstrated both." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Petty Officer First Class Danny Murphy, the team's communications specialist, stuck his head in. "Sir, sorry to interrupt, but we just got word from the hospital. Rodriguez is awake and asking for the doc. Says he wants to thank her personally." Morrison looked at Sarah. "Want to go see your patient?" The drive to the hospital gave Sarah time to think about the conversation she had just had. For 3 years, she had been running from her past, trying to build a new identity that didn't include the weight of her military service. But today had shown her that she couldn't completely separate herself from who she had been. At the hospital, they found Rodriguez sitting up in bed, looking tired but alert. His teammates had arrived ahead of them, and the room was filled with the easy banter that characterized the SEAL Brotherhood. "There she is," Rodriguez said when Sarah entered the room, "the woman who saved my life." The other SEALs turned to look at her, and Sarah could see the new respect in their eyes. Word of her performance during the medical emergency had spread quickly through the tight-knit unit. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked, checking Rodriguez's chart and examining his wound site. "Like I got shot," he replied with a grin. "But Dr. Barnes says I'll be back to full duty in a couple of months. He also said you did exceptional work in the field." Petty Officer Jake Torres, the team's demolitions expert, spoke up. "Doc, what you did today was incredible. I've seen a lot of combat medics in action, and you were operating on a whole different level." Sarah felt the familiar weight of expectations settling on her shoulders. These men were looking at her differently now, not as a support contractor, but as someone who belonged in their world. It was both gratifying and terrifying. "I was just doing my job," she said simply. "No," Morrison interjected from the doorway. "What you did today went way beyond any job description. You saved Rodriguez's life, and you did it with skills that don't come from civilian medical training." The room fell quiet as the SEALs processed Morrison's words. Sarah could see the questions forming in their minds, the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. Her cover was blown, and there was no going back to the anonymity she had enjoyed for the past 3 weeks. Rodriguez reached out and took her hand. "I don't know what your story is, Doc, but I'm grateful you were there today. Whatever brought you to our team, I'm glad you're here." Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "Just focus on getting better. Your team needs you back." As they left the hospital, Morrison walked beside Sarah in comfortable silence. The revelation of her background had changed everything, but he could see she was still processing what it all meant. "Take your time deciding what you want to do," he said as they reached their vehicle. "But know that you have a place with this team, whatever you choose." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the SEAL compound. Colonel Patricia Hayes arrived with a thick folder under her arm and a concerned expression on her face. She had spent the night digging deeper into Sarah's background, and what she had discovered was both impressive and troubling. Morrison met her at the main gate, sensing immediately that this wasn't a routine visit. "Ma'am, what brings you here so early?" "We need to talk about Dr. Chen," Hayes replied without preamble. "Is she on base?" "She's in the medical facility, preparing for today's training schedule." "Why, is there a problem?" Hayes gestured toward Morrison's office. "Let's discuss this privately." Once they were seated, Hayes opened the folder and spread several documents across Morrison's desk. "After our conversation yesterday, I decided to look deeper into Dr. Chen's background. What I found is significant." Morrison examined the papers, his eyebrows rising as he read. Military commendations, deployment records, and medical citations painted a picture of an extraordinary military career. But it was the final document that made him pause. "Purple Heart," he said, looking up at Hayes. "She was wounded during a hostage rescue operation in Syria," Hayes explained. 3 Navy SEALs were killed in the same incident. According to the after-action report, Dr. Chen continued treating wounded personnel despite her own injuries until the evacuation was complete. Morrison continued reading, his respect for Sarah growing with each page. "Says here she was recommended for the Silver Star, but the recommendation was withdrawn at her request." "She didn't want the recognition," Hayes said. The mission commander noted that she blamed herself for the deaths of the 3 SEALs, even though the medical examiner's report clearly stated that their injuries were non-survivable. The pieces of Sarah's story were falling into place. Her exceptional medical skills, her haunted expression when discussing her past, and her decision to leave military service all made sense now. She wasn't just dealing with the normal stress of combat deployment. She was carrying the weight of perceived failure in a situation where success had been impossible. "Where is she now officially?" Morrison asked. "Medical retirement," Hayes replied. "Honorable discharge with full benefits, but she's been off active duty for 3 years. Her assignment here as a civilian contractor was processed through normal channels, but now that we know her background, there are some complications." Morrison didn't like the sound of that. What kind of complications? Before Hayes could answer, there was a knock on the door. Williams entered, his expression urgent. "Sir, we have a situation. Dr. Chen just received a call from DevGru headquarters. Apparently they need her for a consultation on a medical emergency." Hayes and Morrison exchanged glances. "What kind of consultation?" Hayes asked. They didn't give details, Williams replied. Just said it was urgent and related to a current operation. They want her at the Virginia Beach facility within 4 hours. Sarah had been preparing medical supplies for the day's training when the call came. The voice on the other end was familiar. Commander Lisa Park, the current medical officer for DevGru and Sarah's former colleague. Sarah, thank God I reached you, Lisa said without preamble. We have a situation and we need your expertise. Lisa, I'm not active duty anymore, Sarah replied. I can't just drop everything and… This isn't about active duty status, Lisa interrupted. We have 3 SEALs down in a classified location, and the injuries match something you dealt with during Operation Blackbird. The surgeons here don't have experience with that specific type of trauma. Sarah's blood ran cold. Operation Blackbird was the mission that had ended her military career. The one where she had lost 3 good men to injuries she couldn't treat in the field. If Lisa was calling about similar injuries, it meant other SEALs were in the same desperate situation. How similar are we talking? Sarah asked, her professional instincts overriding her emotional reservations. Explosive fragmentation wounds with embedded shrapnel near vital organs, Lisa explained. The on-site medic is good, but he's never seen anything like this. The surgeons want to operate, but they're afraid of causing more damage by removing the shrapnel blindly. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the impossible decisions she had faced during Blackbird. The shrapnel wounds had been unlike anything in the medical textbooks, foreign weapons creating injury patterns that American medics rarely encountered. I'll need to see the imaging scans, she said finally. And I want to talk to the on-site medic directly. I'll arrange everything, Lisa said, relief evident in her voice. But Sarah, you need to get here fast. These men don't have much time. An hour later, Sarah found herself in the back of a military helicopter, flying toward a past she had tried to leave behind. Morrison had insisted on accompanying her, and Hayes had expedited the necessary clearances for her to consult on the classified operation. The DevGru medical facility was exactly as Sarah remembered it. State-of-the-art equipment staffed by the best medical personnel in the military. But walking through those doors brought back a flood of memories she had spent 3 years trying to suppress. Lisa met them at the entrance, her face showing the strain of dealing with a medical crisis beyond her experience. Sarah, thank you for coming. The situation has gotten worse since I called. She led them to a secure briefing room where the medical team was analyzing CT scans and X-rays. The images on the screen showed the same type of complex trauma that had haunted Sarah's nightmares for years. 3 men wounded by an improvised explosive device containing unusual shrapnel, Lisa explained. The fragments are metallic but with an irregular composition that makes them difficult to detect with standard imaging. Sound familiar? Sarah studied the scans, her trained eye picking out details that others might miss. This is identical to what we saw in Syria. The shrapnel appears to be hand-forged metal with embedded ceramic fragments. Standard surgical removal techniques won't work. Dr. James Chen, the lead surgeon, looked up from the images. Dr. Chen, I understand you've dealt with this type of injury before. Can you walk us through the treatment protocol? Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 3 lives hung in the balance, and she was the only person in the room with experience treating these specific injuries. It was Operation Blackbird all over again, except this time she had the benefit of a fully equipped medical facility instead of a field hospital. The key is understanding that the shrapnel isn't just embedded in tissue, she began, pointing to specific areas on the scans. The ceramic fragments create a matrix that makes removal extremely difficult. If you try to extract the metal pieces traditionally, you'll cause massive internal bleeding. Morrison watched from the corner of the room as Sarah transformed before his eyes. The quiet, haunted woman he had come to know disappeared, replaced by the confident, decisive medical officer who had saved countless lives during her military career. What's the alternative? Dr. Chen asked. Careful debridement using a specific technique I developed during my deployment, Sarah replied. It requires precise timing and coordination between surgery and anesthesiology. The patient needs to be maintained in a very specific physiological state, while the shrapnel is removed piece by piece. Lisa stepped forward. Sarah, would you be willing to assist with the surgeries? These men are from Gold Squadron, your old unit. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Sarah's response. She stared at the medical scan, seeing not just anatomical images, but the faces of the men she had failed to save 3 years ago. This was her chance for redemption, an opportunity to use the knowledge gained from her greatest failure to save others. "I'll need complete surgical authority," she said finally. "This procedure can't be done by committee. If you want me to save these men, I need everyone to follow my lead without question." Dr. Chen nodded immediately. "Whatever you need." Sarah looked at Morrison, seeing understanding and support in his eyes. "I'll need to stay here until the surgeries are complete. That could be 12 to 18 hours. Do what you need to do," Morrison replied. "I'll make sure your team knows where you are." As the medical team began preparations for the complex surgeries ahead, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. The confidence that came from being exactly where she belonged. The ghosts of her past were still there, but for the first time she was ready to face them. The first surgery began at 1400 hours. Petty Officer Michael Stone, a 28-year-old weapons specialist from Gold Squadron, lay unconscious on the operating table as Sarah scrubbed in beside Dr. Chen. The familiar ritual of surgical preparation helped calm her nerves, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would define whether she could truly return to military medicine. "Vitals are stable," announced the anesthesiologist, Dr. Rodriguez. "Patient is ready for surgery." Sarah examined the preoperative imaging one final time, mapping out her surgical approach. Stone's injuries were severe but not immediately life-threatening, making him the ideal candidate to start with. If she could successfully remove his shrapnel, it would give her confidence for the more critical cases that followed. "Beginning initial incision," Sarah announced, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. The surgical team around her was composed of the best medical personnel in the military, but they were all depending on her expertise to guide them through uncharted territory. As she worked, Sarah's muscle memory took over. Her hands moved with the precise confidence that came from years of combat surgery, each cut calculated to minimize trauma, while providing maximum access to the embedded shrapnel. The irregular fragments were exactly as she remembered from Syria, jagged pieces of hand-forged metal wrapped in ceramic that made them nearly invisible to standard imaging. "There," she said, pointing to an area that appeared clear on the scans but showed subtle tissue damage. "The ceramic creates microfractures that extend beyond the visible shrapnel. We need to debride this entire area, or he'll develop sepsis within 48 hours. Dr. Chen followed her lead, removing damaged tissue with painstaking care. The surgery that would normally take 2 hours stretched to 4, as they methodically cleared each fragment and verified that no ceramic particles remained in the wound. "Final irrigation and closure," Sarah announced as they completed the procedure. Stone's vital signs remained stable throughout, and the surgical site showed no signs of complications. "Incredible work," Dr. Chen said as they stepped away from the table. "I've never seen surgical technique like that. Where did you learn to identify ceramic shrapnel patterns?" Sarah's expression grew somber. "Trial and error in Syria. I lost 3 men before I figured out the proper technique." As Stone was moved to recovery, Sarah reviewed the files for the next 2 patients. Chief Petty Officer David Park and Petty Officer First Class Anthony Martinez both had more serious injuries, with shrapnel located dangerously close to vital organs. These surgeries would test not just her technical skills but her ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. Morrison had remained at the facility, keeping Sarah's current team informed of the situation. He found her in the surgeon's lounge between operations, studying medical charts and preparing for the next procedure. "How are you holding up?" he asked, sitting down across from her. Sarah looked up from the charts, exhaustion evident in her eyes. "It's like riding a bicycle. The skills are still there, but the emotional weight is heavier than I remembered." Stone's surgery was successful. "Complete removal of all shrapnel fragments," Sarah confirmed. "He'll make a full recovery with proper rehabilitation. But the next 2 cases are more complicated." Morrison could see the burden she was carrying. These weren't just patients to her. They were fellow warriors whose lives depended on her ability to overcome the trauma of her past failures. "The men from my team want you to know they're pulling for you," Morrison said. "Word's gotten out about what you're doing here, and they're proud to serve with you." Sarah managed a small smile. "I'm not sure I deserve that pride yet." "You saved Rodriguez yesterday and now you're here saving more lives," Morrison replied. "That's what heroes do. They show up when people need them most." The second surgery began 2 hours later. Chief Petty Officer David Park's injuries were significantly more complex. with shrapnel fragments lodged near his liver and one piece dangerously close to his heart. Sarah knew that a single mistake could prove fatal. "This is where it gets interesting," Sarah told the surgical team as they examined the imaging. "The fragment near his heart is actually stabilizing a damaged blood vessel. If we remove it incorrectly, he could bleed out in minutes." Dr. Chen studied the scans with new appreciation for the complexity of the situation. "How do we approach it?" "Cardiac bypass," Sarah replied without hesitation. "We need to reroute blood flow around the damaged area before we can safely extract the shrapnel. It's going to require perfect coordination between cardiac and trauma surgery." The next 6 hours were the most intense of Sarah's medical career. Working with a team of specialists, she carefully extracted each piece of shrapnel while monitoring Park's vital signs for any indication of complications. The fragment near his heart required delicate manipulation to avoid catastrophic bleeding, a procedure she had attempted but failed to complete during Operation Blackbird. "Cardiac function remains stable," reported the heart monitor technician as Sarah worked to extract the final piece of shrapnel. "Almost there," Sarah murmured, her hands steady despite the pressure. The fragment was embedded deeper than the imaging had indicated, requiring her to extend the surgical site to gain proper access. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she successfully removed the last piece of metal. Park's heart continued beating steadily, and his blood pressure remained within acceptable parameters. "That's it," Sarah announced, stepping back from the table. All fragments removed, no complications. The surgical team erupted in quiet celebration, their respect for Sarah's abilities now absolute. She had just performed one of the most complex trauma surgeries any of them had ever witnessed, using techniques that weren't taught in any medical school. As Park was moved to the intensive care unit, Sarah prepared for the final and most challenging case. Petty Officer First Class Anthony Martinez had multiple fragments embedded throughout his torso, with one large piece lodged against his spine. The parallels to her final patient during Operation Blackbird were unmistakable. Lisa approached her as she reviewed Martinez's files. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about this case. Martinez was one of the SEALs who carried you to the evacuation helicopter during Blackbird." Sarah looked up sharply. "What?" "After you were wounded, Martinez and 2 others refused to leave until they got you to safety. He risked his own life to save yours 3 years ago." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The young SEAL lying in the operating room waiting for surgery was the same man who had carried her bleeding body to safety when she had been too wounded to walk. Now their roles were reversed and his life was in her hands. "Does he know I'm here?" Sarah asked. "He's been unconscious since the explosion," Lisa replied. "But Sarah, this isn't about repaying a debt. This is about saving a good man who served his country with honor." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that came with this final surgery. Martinez's injuries were the most severe of the 3, and the shrapnel near his spine threatened to cause permanent paralysis if not removed correctly. The final surgery began at 0200 hours, with Sarah leading a team of exhausted but determined medical professionals. Martinez's vital signs were weaker than the previous patients, and the margin for error was virtually non-existent. "Spinal shrapnel removal is a one-shot procedure," Sarah explained to the team. "If we cause any damage to the spinal cord during extraction, he'll never walk again." Working with a neurosurgeon, Sarah carefully exposed the fragment that threatened Martinez's mobility. The piece of metal was larger than expected and had created significant inflammation around the spinal cord. "We need to reduce the swelling before we can safely extract the fragment," Sarah determined after examining the surgical site. "This is going to take longer than expected." For the next 4 hours, Sarah worked with methodical precision to address each complication as it arose. The shrapnel had created a complex pattern of secondary injuries that required innovative solutions she had to develop in real time. Finally, as the sun began to rise outside the operating room windows, Sarah successfully extracted the final piece of shrapnel from Martinez's spine. His neurological responses remained intact, indicating that his mobility had been preserved. "All 3 surgeries successful," Sarah announced as Martinez was wheeled to recovery. "Complete shrapnel removal with no permanent complications." The exhausted surgical team finally allowed themselves to celebrate as Sarah stripped off her surgical gloves and mask. She had just accomplished something unprecedented, 3 consecutive successful surgeries using techniques she had developed from her greatest failure. Dr. Chen approached her as the team began cleaning up. Dr. Chen, what you did here today will change how we approach complex shrapnel injuries. Would you be willing to develop a training protocol based on your techniques? Sarah looked around the operating room where she had just saved 3 lives, feeling a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in years. I'll consider it, she said simply. Morrison found her in the recovery ward checking on her patients as they began to wake up from anesthesia. The haunted expression that had defined her for 3 years was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of a medical professional who had faced her demons and won. Ready to go home? He asked. Sarah looked at the 3 SEALs recovering from their surgeries, each one alive because she had been willing to confront her past and use her skills when they were needed most. Yes, she said finally. I think I'm ready to go home. The helicopter ride back to the SEAL compound was quiet, with Sarah staring out at the landscape below while processing everything that had happened over the past 18 hours. Morrison respected her need for silence, understanding that she was working through emotions that had been buried for 3 years. When they landed, Sarah was surprised to find the entire team waiting for them. Williams, Torres, Murphy, and the rest of the SEALs stood in formation, their faces showing a mixture of respect and curiosity. Word had spread quickly through the special operations community about the medical miracle that had taken place at DevGru headquarters. Welcome back. Doc, Williams said as Sarah stepped off the helicopter. We heard you saved 3 Gold Squadron SEALs last night. Sarah nodded, still feeling the weight of the successful surgeries. They're going to make full recoveries. Torres stepped forward, his expression serious. Ma'am, we want you to know that whatever happened in your past, whatever brought you to our team, we're honored to serve with you. The simple statement hit Sarah harder than any grand gesture could have. These elite warriors, men who had earned their place through years of grueling training and combat experience, were telling her she belonged among them. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you know. Morrison dismissed the team, giving Sarah space to decompress from her emotional ordeal. As the SEALs dispersed, he walked with her toward the medical facility where she had started this journey just days earlier. How are you feeling? He asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. Different. Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there and now it's gone. Any regrets about revealing your background? No, she replied without hesitation. Hiding who I was wasn't protecting anyone, least of all myself. Those 3 men are alive because I was willing to use the skills I gained from my biggest failure. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's integration into the team accelerated dramatically. The SEALs who had once treated her with polite distance now sought her input on medical protocols and shared stories from their own deployments. Her office became a gathering place where the men could discuss not just physical injuries but the psychological challenges that came with their dangerous profession. Rodriguez returned to limited duty ahead of schedule, his recovery progressing better than expected. He made a point of stopping by Sarah's office every morning, partly for medical checkups but mostly to express his continued gratitude for saving his life. Doc, I've been thinking, he said during one of these visits. Before you came along, we had medics who were competent but not connected to what we do. You understand the mission because you've lived it. Sarah looked up from the medical reports she was reviewing. What's your point, Rodriguez? My point is that you're not just our medic anymore. You're part of the team in a way that goes beyond your job description. The observation was accurate. Sarah had noticed the change herself. The SEALs no longer treated her as support personnel but as an integral member of their brotherhood. They sought her advice on matters that had nothing to do with medicine, and she found herself naturally assuming leadership roles during training exercises. Morrison had been watching this transformation with growing satisfaction. He had known from the beginning that Sarah was special, but even he hadn't anticipated how completely she would integrate into his team's culture. The change became official during a routine briefing when Colonel Hayes announced that Sarah's civilian contractor status was being upgraded to a permanent position as the team's dedicated medical officer. The appointment came with security clearances that would allow her to participate in classified planning sessions and accompany the team on operational deployments. Dr. Chen, Hayes said during the announcement, your performance over the past month has been exceptional. The Navy would like to offer you the opportunity to return to active duty with a promotion to lieutenant commander. Sarah felt the eyes of every SEAL in the room focused on her. This was the moment she had been unconsciously preparing for since Rodriguez's accident. The choice between her safe civilian identity and a return to the military, life she had fled 3 years earlier. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer," Sarah began, "but I'd like to continue serving in my current capacity. These men have become my team and I want to stay with them." Hayes nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say that. Your unique position as a civilian contractor with military experience gives you flexibility that active duty status wouldn't provide." After the briefing, Williams approached Sarah with a small wooden box. "Doc, the team voted, and we want you to have this." Inside the box was a custom Navy SEAL Trident pin, identical to the ones worn by the team members but engraved with a medical caduceus symbol. It was a one-of-a-kind piece that officially marked her as part of their brotherhood. "I can't accept this," Sarah said, overwhelmed by the gesture. "I haven't earned the right to wear the trident." "Yes, you have," Morrison said, joining the conversation. "You've proven yourself in combat, saved lives under fire, and demonstrated the kind of courage and skill that defines what we do. As far as this team is concerned, you've earned your place among us." Sarah accepted the pin with tears in her eyes, understanding that this moment represented more than just recognition from her colleagues. It was acceptance of who she really was, not just a doctor or a former military officer, but a warrior who used medical skills to protect her teammates. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters, holding the custom trident pin and reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 3 years ago, she had left military service convinced that she was a failure, haunted by the men she couldn't save during Operation Blackbird. Now she understood that those deaths hadn't been failures but lessons that had prepared her to save other lives. The techniques she had developed from that tragic mission had allowed her to successfully treat Rodriguez, and later to save 3 Gold Squadron SEALs who might otherwise have died. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Torres holding a tablet computer with a video call connection. "Doc, someone wants to talk to you," he said with a grin. On the screen was Petty Officer Martinez, the SEAL she had operated on during her return to DevGru. He was sitting up in his hospital bed, looking tired but alert. "Dr. Chen," he said, his voice still weak but determined, "I wanted to thank you personally for saving my life. The doctors told me that the surgery you performed was incredible." Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with professional pride. "How are you feeling, Martinez?" "Better every day. Full sensation in my legs, no complications. I should be back to training in a few months." He paused, his expression growing serious. "Doc, I remember you from Syria. You carried on treating wounded personnel even after you were hit. That took real courage." "You were the one who carried me to the evacuation helicopter," Sarah replied. "I should be thanking you." Martinez shook his head. "That's what teammates do for each other. Just like what you did for me last week. We take care of our own." After the call ended, Sarah pinned the custom trident to her uniform shirt and looked at herself in the mirror. For the first time in 3 years, she saw not a haunted former officer trying to escape her past, but a confident medical professional who had found her place among warriors. She was Dr. Sarah Chen, former DevGru flight surgeon, current SEAL team medic, and most importantly, a valued member of a brotherhood that had accepted her not despite her past but because of it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new training exercises, and potentially new emergencies where her skills would be tested. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by warriors who trusted her with their lives and whom she would protect with hers. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the deck of a Navy destroyer, watching the horizon as her SEAL team prepared for their first operational deployment together. The mission was classified, but she knew it would test everything they had trained for during the months since Rodriguez's accident had first revealed her true identity. The team had evolved into something extraordinary during those months. Sarah's medical expertise had elevated their training to new levels, allowing them to take calculated risks they wouldn't have attempted with a less experienced medic. More importantly, her presence had given them confidence that someone with real combat medical experience would be there if things went wrong. Morrison joined her at the ship's rail, his face showing the focused intensity that always appeared before a mission. "Ready for this, Doc?" Sarah adjusted the custom trident pin on her tactical vest, a gesture that had become automatic over the past months. I've been ready for this my whole career. I just didn't know it until recently. The conversation was interrupted by Williams calling the team together for final preparations. Sarah gathered her medical gear, checking each piece of equipment with the methodical precision that had saved lives in operating rooms and on battlefields around the world. Listen up, Morrison addressed his team. This mission is going to test everything we've learned together. We're going into a hostile environment where medical evacuation may not be possible for several hours. Doc Chen's presence gives us capabilities we've never had before, but I want everyone to remember that our job is to complete the mission and bring everyone home safely. The SEALs nodded, their trust in Sarah now absolute. She had proven herself not just as a medic, but as a tactical asset who understood their mission requirements and could adapt her medical protocols to support operational needs. As they prepared to launch, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had been a broken woman fleeing from the guilt of perceived failure. The deaths during Operation Blackbird had convinced her that she wasn't capable of handling the pressure of combat medicine. Now she understood that those deaths hadn't been her failure but the inevitable result of impossible circumstances. The techniques she had developed from that experience had already saved multiple lives, and her willingness to share that knowledge had changed how military medics approached complex trauma cases. The mission launch went smoothly, with the team executing their insertion plan with the precision that came from months of intensive training. Sarah accompanied them not as support personnel, but as an integral member of the assault team. Her medical responsibilities balanced with tactical awareness that had been honed during her years with DevGru. 4 hours into the operation, the call she had been preparing for came over the radio. Doc, we have a man down. Torres took shrapnel from an IED, conscious but losing blood fast. Sarah was moving before Morrison could issue orders, her medical training taking over as she navigated through the urban environment toward Torres's position. She found him behind cover, his teammates providing security while he applied pressure to a wound in his shoulder. What's the situation? Sarah asked, dropping to her knees beside Torres and beginning her examination. Feels like the good old days, Torres replied with a pained grin. Just a flesh wound, Doc. Nothing you can't handle. Sarah's examination revealed that Torres had been lucky. The shrapnel had missed major blood vessels and organs, creating a painful but manageable injury. Her field treatment stabilized him quickly, allowing the team to continue their mission without requiring immediate evacuation. Nice work, Doc, Morrison said as they regrouped. Torres, you good to continue? Wouldn't miss it for the world, Torres replied, flexing his bandaged shoulder. Doc's got the magic touch. The mission continued without further medical emergencies, but Sarah's confident handling of Torres's injury had reminded everyone why her presence was so valuable. She wasn't just there to treat catastrophic wounds. Her experience allowed her to quickly assess and stabilize injuries that might otherwise force a team to abort their mission. When they returned to base 3 days later, the mission was deemed a complete success. More importantly for Sarah, she had finally proven to herself that she could handle combat medicine without being paralyzed by memories of past failures. Colonel Hayes was waiting for them when they arrived, along with a delegation of senior officers who had been monitoring the mission. Sarah sensed that something significant was about to happen. Dr. Chen, Hayes began formally, your performance during this deployment has been exceptional. Based on recommendations from Commander Morrison and his entire team, the Navy would like to offer you a unique position. Sarah waited, knowing that whatever was coming would represent another turning point in her journey. We want you to develop and lead a new program for training combat medics in advanced trauma techniques, Hayes continued. Your experience with complex shrapnel injuries and your ability to perform under pressure make you uniquely qualified to prepare the next generation of military medical personnel. The offer was everything Sarah could have hoped for. An opportunity to use her hard-won knowledge to save lives on a much larger scale. But she looked at the SEALs who had become her family over the past months and felt a moment of uncertainty. Ma'am, would this position require me to leave my current team? She asked. Morrison stepped forward. Actually, Doc, the program would be based here. You'd continue serving as our medic while also training other units. Think of it as expanding your mission rather than changing it. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. The thought of leaving these men who had helped her rebuild her confidence and find her purpose again was almost unbearable. "I accept," she said without hesitation. The celebration that followed was subdued but meaningful, with each team member expressing their gratitude for Sarah's decision to stay. They had become more than colleagues. They were a family united by shared purpose and mutual trust. Later that evening, Sarah found herself back in her quarters, looking at the commendations and certificates that now covered her wall. The Purple Heart from Operation Blackbird hung beside recent awards for her work with the SEAL team, creating a visual timeline of her journey from failure to redemption. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Rodriguez now fully recovered and back to active duty. "Doc, I wanted to give you something," he said, holding out a small framed photograph. "It's a picture of the Gold Squadron SEALs you saved at DevGru. They wanted you to have it." The photograph showed 3 healthy, smiling men in their dress uniforms, each one alive because Sarah had been willing to confront her past and use her skills when they were needed most. On the back, someone had written, "To Dr. Sarah Chen, the doc who never gives up." Sarah accepted the photograph with tears in her eyes, understanding that this simple gift represented more than gratitude. It was proof that her journey from broken veteran to confident healer was complete. "Thank you, Rodriguez," she said quietly. "This means everything to me." As Rodriguez left, Sarah placed the photograph on her desk next to her medical journals and training manuals. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she began developing the advanced trauma training program that would prepare other medics for the realities of combat medicine. But tonight, she was content to sit in her quarters, surrounded by reminders of the lives she had saved and the team that had helped her save herself. She was Dr. Sarah Chen, combat medic teacher, and most importantly, a warrior who had learned that true strength came not from avoiding failure, but from using it to become better. The ghosts of Operation Blackbird would always be with her, but they no longer haunted her dreams. Instead, they served as reminders of the price of hesitation and the value of decisive action when lives hung in the balance. She had finally found her way home, not to a place but to a purpose that honored both her past failures and her current successes. In saving others, she had ultimately saved herself, proving that redemption was always possible for those brave enough to face their demons and use their scars to heal others. The SEAL Trident pin on her desk caught the light from her reading lamp, its custom medical caduceus symbol representing everything she had become. She was no longer bleeding in silence, carrying her pain alone. She was part of something bigger than herself, a brotherhood that had accepted her completely and trusted her with their most precious possession, their lives, and she would never let them down.